You've begun praying the rosary with deep devotion, dedicating that time to Mary, but unknowingly, sleep overcame you. Your fingers continued moving along the beads. The prayer continued at its usual pace. Suddenly, your mind was consumed by an inexplicable weariness. Before you could resist, your eyes closed. Upon waking, perhaps minutes later, the feeling of having lost that moment was unavoidable. But is this simply the result of a long day, a natural bodily weakness, or is something more profound happening? If it were merely tiredness, it would occur at any time of day, during any activity requiring concentration. Yet, why does it happen specifically during prayer? This is a question few ask, as it's easier to accept the common explanation: it was a tiring day. The body needed rest. There's nothing wrong with that. However, upon closer examination, this sudden drowsiness during prayer isn't as simple as it seems. The saints of the Church have always viewed prayer as something far more than a personal devotional practice. It's a struggle, a spiritual confrontation, a direct connection between the soul and God. And when a soldier prepares for battle, they must be alert and ready to resist the enemy. Padre Pio, known for his mystical experiences, stated that when we kneel to pray, we immediately enter an invisible battlefield, a war in which many are defeated before realizing they were even fighting. But what does this war entail? Who or what is trying to prevent prayer? And, more importantly, why? If it were just a personal effort, if prayer was simply a habit without consequences, why would there be such resistance? If it were a simple practice without spiritual weight, no one would feel sleepy, distracted, or discouraged during prayer. Yet, the opposite occurs. Every time someone decides to pray fervently, obstacles arise unexpectedly. Padre Pio understood this reality well. He saw and experienced things most people don't. For him, the rosary was not mechanical repetition, but a powerful shield against forces that work to separate souls from God. And if these forces desire anything, it's to prevent the faithful from persevering in prayer. Padre Pio's revelations about this cannot be ignored. He witnessed supernatural events and faced the enemy directly, understanding that every sincere prayer has a real effect, a spiritual consequence. The mere act of taking the rosary in hand causes an invisible reaction, a disturbance in the spiritual realm. And when this prayer is offered with true faith, the impact is immediate. But why do some fall asleep while praying? Is it natural relaxation, or is something inducing this to prevent the prayer's completion? Some report feeling overwhelming tiredness when attempting to pray the rosary, as if something weighed on their eyes and body. Others say that even without physical fatigue, they feel inexplicable discouragement, an internal block preventing them from continuing. If it were merely physical, the tiredness would disappear after rest. But that's not the case. Even when rested, many face the same resistance when trying to pray. This raises a disturbing question. What if this difficulty isn't natural, but direct interference intended to prevent prayer? This idea might seem exaggerated initially, but it makes sense when observing the spiritual lives of those dedicated to prayer. The more one prays, the more obstacles they encounter. The closer one seeks to God, the more unexpected difficulties arise. This is because prayer is an act of war, and like any war, there are strategies, attacks and counterattacks. The enemy knows they cannot stop everyone from praying, but they can make it difficult. They can make discouragement stronger than the will to continue. They can induce distractions. They can burden the body and mind of the person praying. And when these tactics fail, there's one last strategy: to make the person fall asleep before finishing their prayer. Sleeping during the rosary isn't just a physiological phenomenon. It can indicate that your prayer is bothering someone. It's a sign that if you persevere, something can change in your life and the lives of those you pray for. This resistance isn't normal. It has a purpose. This isn't just a theoretical idea. The Church has witnessed historical moments where the rosary's power was undeniable, events demonstrating that this prayer, when offered with faith, can alter the destiny of entire nations. If the rosary is so powerful, why do so many find it difficult to pray? What is it about this prayer that mobilizes spiritual forces to prevent it? This answer isn't just ancient teaching. It has been witnessed by saints, documented in miracles, and even confessed by those who unsuccessfully tried to combat it. What has been revealed can surprise even the most devout. Few realize that simply holding a rosary provokes a reaction in the spiritual world. Something happens, invisible to human eyes, but deeply perceptible to those who understand this battle's reality. Padre Pio knew this. He understood the rosary wasn't just a devotional practice, but a weapon of war. And he wasn't alone. In one of his most intense visions, Padre Pio heard words that echo as a warning: if the faithful knew the power of the rosary, all hell would tremble. This means there's something the enemy fears above all else, something that, if understood by all the faithful, would change history and dismantle the plans of darkness. But if the rosary has this power, why is it so difficult to pray? Why do so many give up before finishing? The answer isn't obvious. What is known, and confirmed by many saints and exorcists, is that the rosary is a direct threat to the kingdom of darkness. When prayed with faith, its effect is devastating for spiritual enemies. They can't bear to hear it. Each Hail Mary, Our Father, and Glory is like a sword cutting through what they try to establish in people's lives. But something even more disturbing has become evident throughout history. One such moment was the Battle of Lepanto in 1571. Christian Europe was on the verge of collapse. The Ottoman Empire, an overwhelming power, was about to dominate the West. Military strategists believed Christian defeat was inevitable. But Saint Pius V did something unexpected. Instead of relying solely on military might, he called all of Christendom to pray the rosary in churches, homes, squares, and cathedrals. Thousands knelt and asked for Mary's intercession. Then, something happened. What seemed like certain defeat turned into a historic victory against all odds. Against all military logic, the Christian fleet inexplicably destroyed the enemy. Many who fought reported an invisible force intervening, confusing the adversary, and changing the course of events. From that moment, the rosary became an even more powerful symbol. The Church knew this victory wasn't merely human, and the enemy realized it too. It became clear that the rosary was a real danger to any force opposing God's will. That's why it's still fought against in so many ways. That's why so many face unexpected difficulties when trying to pray it. Discouragement appears without explanation. Sleep arrives suddenly. Scattered thoughts take over the mind. It's as if something constantly tries to prevent this connection. And it is. Padre Pio warned that nothing in the spiritual world happens by chance. If there's resistance to the rosary, it's because it has a power that frightens. It not only protects, but also destroys barriers, undoes ties, and drives away negative influences. Many exorcists report that during exorcisms, demons react violently to the rosary. Some scream, others beg for it to stop. They know what happens when someone perseveres in praying it. That's why the enemy uses every tactic to prevent it. The first tactic is sleep, a sudden tiredness, a feeling of torpor that makes the person black out before finishing. The second is distraction. Random thoughts appear, taking the mind from prayer. Useless memories, forgotten commitments, or irrelevant concerns invade consciousness. The third, and perhaps most dangerous, is discouragement. The enemy whispers that prayer isn't working, planting the idea that the rosary is too repetitive, tiring, and not worth continuing. Little by little, they make the person believe their prayers are empty and make no difference. But they do. Each Hail Mary, even if said without concentration, has spiritual weight. Each completed rosary is a blow against those who wish to separate souls from God. Now that you know this, something must be understood urgently. If hell trembles before the rosary, if it's fought against so intensely, it's because it's a weapon that needs to be used. The greater the resistance, the greater the certainty of its effectiveness. The more barriers placed in the way, the clearer it becomes that this prayer is necessary. Padre Pio revealed a secret that can completely change how we face this battle, something he did himself when attacked by the enemy. A simple phrase said with faith has the power to ward off any negative influence. But before revealing it, something deeper must be understood. If there's resistance, if there's a force preventing the rosary, there's a reason. This reason is directly linked to what the rosary is capable of doing. If it were just an ordinary prayer, it wouldn't cause such disturbance. But it's not. And that's why those who wish to prevent it do everything to demoralize it, make it uninteresting and tiring. They know something many believers haven't yet understood, but this truth is about to be revealed. For centuries, humanity has witnessed wars, empires falling, and nations being built, conflicts that have marked history. But there are battles not recorded in history books. Silent wars fought on an invisible field where spiritual forces clash in an eternal conflict. In the midst of these battles, a secret was preserved by the saints and the most devout. The rosary isn't just a prayer, it's a weapon of war, a sharp sword against evil. This understanding didn't emerge randomly. It was revealed over time, witnessed by those who confronted the enemy directly. One of the most remarkable instances of this revelation occurred in 1571, during the Battle of Lepanto. The Ottoman Empire was advancing on Christian Europe with an seemingly invincible army. Military commanders knew defeat was imminent. The enemy forces were superior in numbers, strategy, and firepower. There was no hope. But then, something unexpected happened. Saint Pius V, the Pope at the time, understood this war couldn't be won with human weapons alone. He knew that when strength and intelligence fail, only one alternative remains: faith. He called all of Christendom to unite in prayer, asking for the intercession of the Blessed Virgin Mary. The call spread rapidly. Men, women, and children knelt in their homes. Churches filled, and the rosary was recited like never before. It was a collective outcry, a desperate plea for the impossible. And then, on the day of the battle, the miracle occurred. What was a certain defeat turned into an inexplicable victory. The Christian fleet, despite being inferior, defeated the enemy surprisingly. The soldiers who fought witnessed phenomena that defied any military explanation. The winds changed direction suddenly. Storms appeared at the precise moment to hinder the Ottomans' movement. And the previously unbeatable enemies were disorganized by an invisible force. There was no doubt. The impossible had happened, and this victory was immediately attributed to the rosary's power. Saint Pius V recognized there was no natural explanation. The rosary had been key, and Mary's intercession had decided the battle. Since then, October 7th has been celebrated as the Feast of Our Lady of the Rosary, an eternal reminder that this prayer isn't an empty practice, but a weapon with real effects in the physical and spiritual world. But this wasn't the only time the rosary demonstrated its power. Throughout the centuries, reports multiplied, armies were defeated, persecutions ceased, inexplicable plagues disappeared. In Fatima, Portugal, Mary appeared to 3 children and made a direct request: pray the rosary every day. She asked for nothing else, gave no complicated orders, just that. Why? Because Mary knew this was the key to spiritual protection and defeating evil forces. This brings us back to the main question: if the rosary has this power, why do so many find it difficult to pray? Why do we feel sleepy, distracted, or discouraged whenever we try? Padre Pio said this wasn't a coincidence. He knew that every time someone picks up a rosary and begins to pray, an invisible battle begins. Hell stirs. The enemy recognizes the danger and mobilizes to prevent the prayer from continuing. The spiritual attack begins subtly. Tiredness appears out of nowhere. Thoughts become confused. The mind suddenly becomes heavy. Time seems to pass more slowly, and each Hail Mary seems to require immense effort. But it's not just a feeling, it's real resistance created to prevent the prayer from reaching its end. This resistance doesn't happen only on a personal level. History shows the Rosary isn't just an individual prayer. It has the power to change nations, influence governments, and interrupt evil plans on a global scale. When evil forces realize a group is uniting in prayer, they do everything to interrupt it. Distractions are created, discouragement is implanted, conflicts are intensified. And make no mistake, this happens because the Rosary works. If it were just a repetition of words without effect, there would be no resistance. No one would feel sleepy. There would be no effort to demoralize this practice. But what we see is the opposite. Hell trembles before the Rosary because it's a weapon. And if it's a weapon, it means there are those who want to prevent it from being used. The question is, will you let this happen? If praying the Rosary were just a habit without impact, nothing would happen. But if difficulties arise every time you try, it means your prayer is bothering someone. The question remains, how to overcome this resistance? How to prevent these barriers from interfering with your prayer? How to pray the Rosary without being interrupted by distractions, tiredness, or discouragement? This answer has already been revealed by those who faced this battle before us. Padre Pio, Saint Pius V, all the saints have left clear clues on how to persevere in prayer when difficulties arise. And something even more powerful, there's a phrase Padre Pio used in moments when the spiritual attack was most intense, a phrase that, when said with faith, has the power to ward off any negative influence. This phrase will be revealed in the next chapter of this journey. If there's something the enemy truly fears, it's prayer. And among all forms of prayer, one causes a profound impact on the spiritual world, the Rosary. It's no coincidence this prayer is constantly fought against, ridiculed, or forgotten by many. It's no coincidence so many people face unexpected difficulties when they try to pray it. What few know is that this prayer, so simple in structure, has a devastating effect against darkness. Exorcists know this better than anyone. In countless exorcism sessions, a pattern repeats itself. The demons resist, they scream, they writhe, but when the Rosary is recited, something changes. The stories are always the same. The evil spirits become desperate, and many beg for the prayer to stop. They cannot bear to hear the repetition of the Hail Mary. They know what happens when a faithful person persists in praying the Rosary. Padre Pio always warned about this. He not only believed in the power of the Rosary, he lived it. He prayed countless rosaries daily, always carrying one with him, and recommended its recitation to all seeking spiritual protection. For him, the Rosary was the true weapon of modern times, a shield against the enemy's attacks. But why does this prayer have such an impact? The answer lies in its structure. Each mystery contemplated takes us deeper into salvation history. Each Hail Mary unites us to Mary and, through her, to Christ. Each repetition isn't just a repetition, but a direct blow against evil. The enemy knows that the more a faithful person dedicates themselves to the rosary, the more protected they become. That's why they fight to prevent this practice. If you've ever tried to pray the rosary and felt sudden tiredness, incessant distractions, or inexplicable discouragement, know that this isn't a coincidence. This happens because praying the rosary places the soul in a territory where spiritual forces clash. The stronger the prayer, the greater the resistance. But there's something few know. During exorcisms, amidst the most violent manifestations, some demons were forced to confess a disturbing truth: each Hail Mary prayed with faith is a fiery blow against us. This phrase, spoken by those who try to destroy souls, confirms what the saints have always taught: each time someone prays a Hail Mary, something happens in the spiritual world. The darkness recedes, barriers fall, chains are broken. And that's exactly why the enemy works to weaken the faith of those who pray. One of the most effective tactics to prevent the rosary's action is to implant the idea that it's too repetitive, tiring, or meaningless. How many times have you heard someone say that praying the rosary is mechanical, lacks emotion, or doesn't bring immediate results? These doubts are planted like small seeds, causing many to gradually give up the practice. And that's where the danger lies. When a person stops praying the rosary, something changes. Protection weakens, enemy attacks become more frequent, discouragement intensifies, and distancing from God becomes easier. It all starts subtly, almost imperceptibly, but little by little, the soul that was once strengthened begins to feel more vulnerable, more exposed, more spiritually fragile. What to do in the face of this? Padre Pio always recommended 3 simple steps to overcome any spiritual resistance to the rosary. 1. Persevere, even without will. If difficulty arises, keep praying. It doesn't matter if the mind gets distracted, if tiredness is great, or if prayer seems meaningless. Victory lies in perseverance. 2. Change your posture. If sleep comes, pray standing up, walk, pray aloud. The enemy cannot stand the persistence of a determined, faithful person. 3. Invoke the name of Jesus and Mary. There's something that the darkness cannot stand: the proclamation of the name of Christ and His Mother. Whenever you feel resistance, say aloud, "May Jesus live. May Mary live forever." This last phrase, taught by Padre Pio, isn't just a pious invocation. It has a direct effect on spiritual combat. In one of his most intense experiences, Padre Pio was hearing confessions when he realized that a man before him wasn't an ordinary penitent. The atmosphere became heavy, an evil presence revealed itself, and Padre Pio understood what was before him. Without hesitation, he looked at that being and firmly declared, "May Jesus live. May Mary live forever." The effect was immediate. The man, who before spoke calmly, began to contort. His expression changed, his gaze filled with hatred, and he refused to repeat those words. In a matter of seconds, he disappeared, leaving behind an unbearable smell of sulfur. What Padre Pio witnessed that day confirmed that these words carry a power that goes beyond human understanding. They aren't mere phrases, but an impenetrable shield against any evil influence. And if it worked for Padre Pio, it works for any faithful person who resorts to them with faith. Now, the question remains, if this prayer has this impact, why do so many abandon it? Why is the rosary so ignored by many, even within the Church? The answer is deeper than it seems. Because the rosary not only protects, it transforms. It drives away evil, but also strengthens the soul of the one who prays it. And this is something that the darkness cannot allow. But there's something even more impressive. A mystery behind the tiredness that many feel when praying. A mystery that defies logic and leaves even the most experienced in the spiritual life perplexed. This mystery will be revealed below. Most believe that feeling tired when praying the rosary is just a natural consequence of an exhausting day, a simple, logical, comfortable explanation. But if it were just that, why do so many experience the same phenomenon? Why does sleep come suddenly, like a weight on the eyes, just when the prayer begins? And why does this sensation disappear when the prayer is interrupted? This is one of the most disturbing questions of the spiritual life, something that cannot be ignored. Because if there's an invisible resistance, if there's a barrier that appears at the moment of prayer and disappears as soon as the rosary is put aside, then this cannot be a simple coincidence. Padre Pio understood this reality like few others. He knew that prayer wasn't just a devotional act, but a battlefield. And as in every war, there are forces that try to prevent victory. The enemy cannot stop someone from bending their knees, but they can make that person feel so tired, so distracted, and so discouraged that they give up praying on their own. This is how they act. Spiritual resistance is something real. It's not just physical tiredness or some distraction, it's something directed, calculated, planned. Because if the rosary really were just a repetition of worthless words, why would it face so much opposition? Exorcists have warned about this for centuries. The rosary has such a powerful effect that many times demons confess their aversion to this prayer during exorcism rituals. There are records of possessions in which, when ordered to tell the truth, the evil spirit was forced to admit, "Each Hail Mary is like a blow of fire upon us." This explains why so many people have difficulty completing a simple rosary, because it's not just a prayer, it's a confrontation. And there are signs that can indicate if someone is being targeted by this spiritual attack. The first sign is inexplicable tiredness. No matter how well rested you are, as soon as you start praying, an overwhelming drowsiness takes over. Your body feels heavy, your eyes close, and your mind starts to fade away. But curiously, if you stop praying and decide to do something else, sleep disappears immediately. The second sign is constant distraction. You start praying with good intention, but before you realize it, your mind has wandered. Random thoughts invade your prayer, matters of the day, unconnected memories, insignificant problems. You try to concentrate, but your mind always finds something to divert you. The third sign is discouragement. Without explanation, something inside you says that the prayer isn't working, that the rosary is too repetitive, that maybe it would be better to do something else. Doubt sets in subtly. Does this prayer really have any effect? Should I continue? And it's at this moment that many give up. But this is exactly the enemy's strategy. They cannot stop you from picking up the rosary, but they can make it seem useless. They can make every word seem empty. They can make you wonder if it's really worth it. And here's the secret that few know: if you are facing this resistance, it means that your prayer is having a real impact. The enemy doesn't fight against what doesn't threaten them. If you feel a weight every time you try to pray the rosary, it's because it's bothering someone. If resistance increases, it means your prayer is breaking down barriers, undoing ties, destroying what darkness is trying to build in your life and the lives of those you pray for. But there's something even more disturbing. In some cases, this attack isn't limited to prayer. Some people notice inexplicable changes in their lives when they intensify their spiritual life. Problems arise out of nowhere. Relationships become tense for no apparent reason. Small daily conflicts seem to grow disproportionately. When this happens, many ask, why do difficulties increase when I start to pray more? The answer is simple: the enemy attacks those on the right path. If your life was peaceful, and when you started to pray the rosary more frequently, unexpected challenges arose, this isn't a coincidence. It's a sign that you are advancing spiritually, and this is being perceived in the invisible world. Many saints experienced this same phenomenon. Each time they intensified their prayer, they went through greater trials, but those who persevered always witnessed the same thing: resistance disappears when the battle is won. If you are having difficulty praying the rosary, this isn't a reason to give up. On the contrary, it's a call to persevere even more, because the resistance you face now is proof that your prayer is working. But there's something that can make all the difference. There's a method taught by Padre Pio to neutralize these attacks and make prayer more effective, a way to resist sleep, ward off distractions, and break the discouragement that arises. During the prayer of the rosary, most people believe that falling asleep is a weakness, a failure, a sign of not enough discipline to persevere. This may be true in some cases, but something much deeper is going on. What if, in certain situations, falling asleep during prayer wasn't a spiritual attack, but rather a divine intervention? This is a question few consider, but that has already been addressed by saints and mystics. In some circumstances, God can allow the soul to enter a state of rest during prayer, as a form of protection. But protection against what? And why? To understand this mystery, we need to understand what happens during deep prayer. When someone prays with intensity and total surrender, their soul becomes vulnerable to spiritual attacks. The mind opens to communication with God, but at the same time, becomes a target. The enemy always looks for a moment of distraction, a weak point, to launch their attacks. And few perish. God knows when their soul is exposed. There are reports of saints who, in moments of intense prayer, felt an unusual drowsiness, and simply passed out. But when they woke up, they realized that something had happened in the spiritual world. While they slept, some felt an inexplicable peace, as if they had been removed from an invisible battle. Others reported that while they slept, they had dreams that brought them messages or guidance. Padre Pio mentioned this possibility in some of his reflections. He understood that sleep wasn't always a distraction or an attack from the enemy. Sometimes it was a sign that God was intervening, removing the soul from the battlefield at that specific moment. But why would God do this? Because there are times when the battle is more intense than we can bear. Our conscious mind can be fragile in the face of certain spiritual realities. During prayer, especially in moments of great surrender, our soul becomes an obvious target. And if God realizes that at that moment the danger is too great, He simply removes us from the scene. Think of it this way: when someone approaches, the first thing we do is look for an opening. Imagine an invisible knight approaching. Someone who is praying, God, knowing this reality much better than we do, can decide to put this person in a state of deep rest to protect them. This phenomenon has already been described by many saints and mystics. Some have reported that when praying intensely, they were taken by an irresistible sleep, as if their soul had been led to a resting place before something worse happened. This means that whenever we sleep during prayer, we are being protected. The key to discerning whether sleep is a spiritual attack or divine intervention isn't necessarily in the signs accompanying it. If you fall asleep and wake up feeling heaviness, restlessness, guilt, or that you missed something important, it was probably a spiritual attack. The enemy interrupted your prayer, and you feel a loss. However, if you wake up feeling inexplicable peace, a lightness of spirit, or even realize your heart continued praying while you slept, it may have been a grace from God. Many mystics have reported that while they slept, their souls continued to pray even while their bodies rested. This profound mystery goes beyond human understanding, but has been witnessed countless times. So, what should you do if you feel sleepy while praying? First, don't give up. If you notice sleep coming on insistently, change your position. Pray standing, walk while praying, raise your voice. These small actions can break the influence of tiredness, if it's a spiritual attack. However, if despite your efforts, you still feel heaviness in your eyes and uncontrollable drowsiness, ask God for discernment. Say in your prayer, Lord, if this sleep is an attack, strengthen me to resist. But if it comes from you, let it be for my protection, and so that my soul remains united with you while I rest. This simple attitude can completely change your perception. The spiritual battle isn't just about resistance, but about trust. If God allows you to rest, trust He knows what He's doing. If He allows you to fight against sleep, trust He will give you the strength to resist. Now, there's something even more impressive, a clear sign that can indicate when your life has entered a spiritual battle. Another sign that many ignore, but can reveal you on the right path. Many begin praying the rosary with devotion, and suddenly, their lives seem to go into turmoil. Small everyday problems turn into unexpected difficulties. Crises arise without explanation, and an invisible weight accumulates. Previously stable relationships come into conflict. Financial issues become a burden. The mind fills with doubts and concerns. At this moment, many ask, if I'm getting closer to God, why does everything seem to be falling apart? Countless faithful throughout history have asked this question. Many begin praying fervently, determined to deepen their relationship with God, and suddenly face difficulties like never before. But this experience isn't a sign they are wrong. On the contrary, Padre Pio clearly said, the enemy doesn't attack those far from God, he attacks those getting closer. This is the first great sign you're on the right path. If, when you intensify your prayer, your life seems to go into crisis, this isn't a coincidence. The enemy notices when a soul is escaping their influence and reacts in every possible way. If they cannot directly impede your prayer, they will try to make your life so difficult and exhausting that you feel unmotivated to continue. And here's the point few understand: the spiritual battle intensifies when we are closer to victory. If you started praying the rosary more frequently, and suddenly conflicts, trials, and challenges arose, see this as an indication that something powerful is happening. Each Hail Mary prayed with faith bothers the enemy. Each completed rosary represents a defeat for the forces that try to distance humanity from God. And this isn't just theory. Exorcists report that many people, when they strengthen their prayer life, realize their routine becomes more difficult. This happens because the enemy doesn't want to lose control over their victims. If they realize your prayer is breaking negative spiritual bonds, they will use all means to prevent you from continuing. But there's something few realize: the spiritual attack doesn't always happen obviously. It doesn't manifest only as a supernatural event or strange sensations during prayer. It often hides in the details of everyday life. Some people start having sleepless nights. Others feel deep sadness for no apparent reason. Some face constant problems at home or work. Small conflicts seem to arise out of nowhere. Arguments become more frequent, and everything around you seems like too heavy a burden to carry. This type of resistance doesn't mean God has moved away. On the contrary, it means your prayer is bothering those who want to keep you from Him. And there's something even more important. If you've come this far, if even facing these difficulties, you still feel the desire to persevere, it means your prayer is already having an effect. The enemy cannot resist the power of Mary's intercession. They can try to hinder, demotivate, distract, but they cannot stop a determined soul from continuing to pray. But there's a question that needs to be asked: how to react to these attacks? How to prevent this resistance from making you give up? Padre Pio left a clear answer. He always said that the best way to overcome a spiritual attack was to persist in precisely what the enemy is trying to prevent. If the enemy tries to demotivate you, keep praying. If they create distractions, pray more intensely. If they create difficulties, offer them to God as a sacrifice. But in addition to this strategy, there's something even more powerful. A secret that can break this resistance and transform any spiritual attack into a moment of grace. Something Padre Pio used to ward off evil influences and strengthen his prayer. If there's something the enemy fears more than anything, it's perseverance. They can try to get in the way, discourage, and put obstacles, but if a soul decides to continue despite everything, they begin to lose power. Padre Pio knew this better than anyone. He not only recognized the spiritual battle, but lived it daily. What he faced in his journey of faith went far beyond what most can imagine: physical attacks, disturbing visions, nocturnal hauntings. The enemy himself manifested to try to stop him from praying. But one detail always repeated itself: Padre Pio never gave up. He understood the best way to fight evil was to persist in exactly what it was trying to stop. And this was the strategy he left as a teaching for all those facing difficulties in praying the rosary. Padre Pio's first strategy was simple but extremely effective. If the enemy tried to interfere with his prayer, he would increase the prayer time even more. If a distraction arose, he wouldn't give in. If tiredness appeared, he would change position, walk while praying, change his tone of voice to stay awake, but never interrupt his prayer. He knew the enemy's goal was precisely to interrupt the prayer. This is something everyone can apply. If sleep comes during prayer, don't give in immediately. Try praying standing up, walk, pray aloud, change how you're praying. If distractions appear, simply return to prayer without giving them space. But there was an even more powerful secret in Padre Pio's strategy. He taught that when resistance became too intense, it was necessary to offer this difficulty to God. Many give up on prayer because they believe they aren't praying correctly. They feel distracted, tired, and without strength. But what Pio said was completely different. He taught that God doesn't expect perfect prayers, but persevering prayers. If prayer is difficult, offer this difficulty to God. If tiredness comes, transform it into a spiritual sacrifice. If distractions appear, ask God to accept your prayer even with its imperfections. This changes everything because, instead of being a reason to give up, each difficulty becomes a reason to continue. The enemy realizes that the more they try to interfere, the stronger the prayer becomes, and so little by little, they retreat. But there's an even deeper point. Padre Pio taught that when spiritual difficulties reached their extreme, there was a definitive weapon against any evil influence, pronouncing a specific phrase that immediately warded off any spiritual attack. Padre Pio faced spiritual battles that go beyond most people's understanding. He knew that when he entered prayer, he was crossing an invisible line into the supernatural world, where forces contrary to God's will tried to impede his mission. Many times, he was physically attacked, dragged out of bed, beaten by evil entities that wanted to silence him, but none of this made him give up. Among the countless accounts of his spiritual struggles, there's an episode that reveals a powerful secret about how to face any attack from the enemy. Once, Padre Pio was in the confessional attending to a man who, at first glance, seemed ordinary. The man began to speak, but something in his voice made Padre Pio feel deeply uneasy. The words were carefully chosen, the intonation respectful, but something was wrong. As the confession progressed, the sins confessed became more and more terrible, almost as if they were described to cause disturbance. It was then that Padre Pio realized this was no ordinary penitent. Something evil was behind that presence. The atmosphere became heavy. A strange chill took over the room, and Padre Pio knew he was facing something deeper than simple human sin. Without hesitation, he looked directly into the man's eyes, and with spiritual authority, declared, "May Jesus live. May Mary live forever." The effect was immediate. The man began to contort, his countenance changed abruptly, his voice, before calm, became filled with hatred. He tried to pronounce the same words but couldn't. Something stopped him. His eyes filled with anger, and in an instant, he disappeared, leaving behind an unbearable smell of sulfur. This event made it clear to Padre Pio that this phrase wasn't just an expression of faith, but a spiritual weapon capable of destroying any evil influence. But why does this phrase have so much power? Because it declares two fundamental truths that the enemy cannot bear to hear. The first is that Jesus lives forever. This is the greatest defeat for darkness. The devil knows that Christ conquered death, and this victory is eternal. He cannot change this reality. Every time this phrase is pronounced, it's as if the memory of the definitive defeat of the forces of evil is reaffirmed. The second is that Mary lives forever. The presence of the Virgin Mary in the spiritual realm is a torment for the enemy. She was chosen by God to be the mother of the Savior, and has a fundamental role in the battle against darkness. Her intercession is powerful, and the enemy knows they cannot face her. That's why this phrase is so effective. It's not just a set of words, but a proclamation of spiritual truths that destabilize any evil attack. And here's the secret that few know: this can be used by anyone who feels spiritually attacked. If, when praying the rosary, you feel sudden sleepiness, uncontrollable distractions, or inexplicable discouragement, pronounce this phrase with faith. Try repeating this phrase aloud: May Jesus live forever. May Mary live forever. If you feel a heavy atmosphere in your home, a weight on your heart, or a feeling of restlessness for no apparent reason, pronounce this phrase with faith. If, during your prayer, you notice something trying to interrupt your connection with God, declare these words firmly, and something will happen. The enemy cannot bear the truth. They may try to confuse, weaken faith, generate distractions and difficulties, but when confronted with the reality of Christ's victory and Mary's intercession, they lose all strength. Padre Pio used this phrase as a spiritual shield and taught that all the faithful could do the same. But now, an important question arises: how to transform this knowledge into a life habit? How to ensure your prayer is always effective, even in the face of the greatest trials? The answer will be revealed in the next and final chapter of this journey. Now that you know the truth about spiritual attacks, the invisible and powerful resistance, and the phrase Padre Pio used to ward off any evil influence, the final question is how to ensure your prayer is always effective, even in the greatest trials. The real challenge isn't just understanding the spiritual battle, but persevering in it every day. The enemy knows that faith cannot be destroyed all at once. If they tried this directly, many would grow stronger and resist. That's why their strategy is different: to wear it down little by little, to weaken it slowly, to make prayer difficult and uninteresting until the person simply stops. This is the real danger, and that's exactly why perseverance in prayer is the greatest weapon a Christian can have. Padre Pio knew this and left practical teachings so that no one would fall into this trap. 1. Pray even without desire. Many believe prayer only has value when done with fervor, but this is one of the greatest spiritual lies. The true merit of prayer isn't in praying only when you feel good, but in praying when you have no desire at all. Because it's at that moment that prayer becomes a sacrifice, and sacrifices have invaluable power before God. Padre Pio said that prayer done with effort has more value than action done easily. If desire appears, pray anyway. If distractions continue, perseverance makes all the difference. 2. Transform difficulty into God. Instead of seeing difficulty as a sign of failure, see it as an opportunity to offer something to God. If your prayer is difficult, transform this effort into a spiritual gift. Say mentally, Lord, I offer you this difficulty. May I be able to pray today, even amidst this fatigue, for the conversion of a soul. This completely changes how we face spiritual resistance. 3. Use Padre Pio's phrase, now you know that may Jesus live forever. May Mary live forever, isn't just a phrase, but a powerful spiritual weapon. Use it whenever you feel discouraged, sleepy, extremely distracted, or any other type of resistance. Say it aloud without fear. Declare this truth over your life and your prayer, and watch what happens. 4. Make prayer an unbreakable habit. The enemy doesn't fear occasional prayers, they fear constant prayers. If the rosary is something you pray only when you feel like it, they will always find ways to stop you. But if it becomes part of your routine, a non-negotiable commitment, any attack will lose its power. Create a rule for yourself. I will pray every day, no matter what happens, and stick to it. In time, this unshakable decision becomes a spiritual fortress around you. The enemy can try to tear it down, but they will not succeed. 5. Remember what is at stake. Why does hell tremble before the rosary? Because this prayer has the power to change lives, transform hearts, and destroy evil influences. Every time a faithful person decides to pray, there's a real impact on the spiritual world. When you hold the rosary, you aren't just holding prayer beads, you're holding a powerful weapon, a shield against all evil. Now that you know this, the only thing left is to decide, will you persevere, or will you give in to resistance? The choice is yours, but remember, each Hail Mary prayed with faith is a victory. Each completed rosary is one more step closer to God. If you find it difficult to pray, continue. If you face resistance, persevere. If distractions increase, fight against them. Because, in the end, those who remain faithful in prayer are the ones who experience the greatest miracles. This is the promise that never fails.